Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the horrific, decades-long, and shockingly unresolved case of America's most prolific serial killer. We're going to break down the timeline, the psychology, and some truly baffling recent developments in a case that's haunted the Pacific Northwest for over 40 years. It's a heavy subject for sure, but understanding these facts and the timeline, it's absolutely crucial. Let's get started.
Just listen to this chilling confession. I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight. Seriously. When police finally sat across from Gary Ridgway and asked him to describe what he remembered about his victims, he didn't remember their faces, he didn't know their names. And the most terrifying part? He didn't say this with any kind of shame or horror. He said it with the mild, kind of frustrated tone of a guy just trying to remember where he parked his car.
His whole existence was just this terrifying duality. To everyone around him, he was just Gary Ridgway, the truck painter, the guy who went to church every Sunday, read the Bible out loud on first dates, and even coached his son's Little League team. But hidden in the shadows, out across the hills, rivers, and wooded backroads of Washington state, he was the Green River Killer. We're talking about a man who claimed to have murdered over 71 women. He is literally the ultimate terrifying example of the monster next door.
All right, Section 1, the Green River Murders.
So the summer of 1982 is really where this nightmare began. It started in July. A couple of boys were playing near the Green River outside Seattle and found the body of a 16-year-old runaway named Wendy Caulfield. Now at first, police found very little and kind of had to move on. But then, just 3 weeks later, authorities discovered 4 more bodies in that exact same stretch of river. Then another and another. This rapid, relentless discovery just set off absolute panic across the entire state of Washington. 55. To put the sheer scale of that terror into perspective, by the end of that summer, bodies were turning up so often that investigators formed a massive, dedicated task force of 55 people. And their one and only job was to find this killer. They worked on absolutely nothing else. But even with all those resources, they basically had 0 leads to work with. Which brings us to Section 2, hiding in plain sight. You see, Ridgway was methodical in a way investigators just hadn't dealt with before. It was a strict 4-step process. First, he deliberately chose his victims, targeting marginalized women or teenage runaways along Route 99, people he calculated society wouldn't search for too aggressively. Second, because he was this ordinary-looking, soft-spoken guy, he'd build trust by actually showing them photos of his young son. Third, he'd take them to quiet spots and strangle them. And finally, step 4, he scattered their remains across a massive, sprawling geography so no single cluster of bodies would ever point back to one specific location. And he didn't just hide these women. He actively manufactured confusion to throw off the cops. He actually admitted that returning to the bodies made him feel closer to them, so he'd sometimes move them again, just to mess up the geography even more. He'd even plant false evidence, like cigarette butts and gum wrappers that weren't his, literally just to send investigators down blind alleys. He approached this horrific work exactly the way a professional thinks about their craft, building a system, maintaining it, and constantly refining it. Now, looking back, this whole timeline is just a deeply frustrating string of missed opportunities. Back in 1983, a witness literally saw a missing woman named Marie Malvar get into Ridgway's truck. Police went to his house to question him, but he was super calm, totally cooperative, and just denied the whole thing. In '84, he even agreed to, and passed, a police polygraph test. By 1987, they finally got a warrant, searched his home, and collected hair and DNA samples. But the tech back then just wasn't good enough to match it to the crime scenes, so they had to let him go. And the profound tragedy there? He went on to kill at least 22 more women after that 1987 questioning. Which leads us to this incredibly dark, unsettling quote from his wife, who he married in 1988. She later told a reporter, completely without irony, "I believed I saved lives by making him happy." And Ridgway actually agreed. He said being with her made him feel settled, so his urge to kill kind of quieted down. During parts of this time, she literally thought his early morning absences were just him working overtime at the factory, when in reality, he was still taking lives. Of the 49 confirmed murders, only 3 happened after they got married, ending with his last confirmed victim in 1998. After that, he just stopped entirely, like someone dropping a bad habit. Moving on to Section 3, caught by science. So how do they finally catch him? A massive technological leap. Remember that DNA collected in 1987 that was totally useless at the time? Well, in 2001, Detective Dave Reichert, who had been on this case since day one in '82, pushed to retest it. Using brand new DNA technology that didn't exist in the 80s, they ran Ridgway's old sample against evidence from 4 of the victims, and it was an exact, complete match. No doubt about it. On November 30th, 2001, police waited for him to finish his shift as a spray painter at the truck factory, and they finally slapped the cuffs on the 52-year-old right there in the parking lot.
When they finally confronted him with that DNA, his initial annoyance basically just turned into silence, and that set up the 2003 plea deal. Facing the death penalty, Ridgway made a highly calculated trade. He traded his memories for his life. He pled guilty and had to tell investigators every single detail he could remember. For months, he'd sit in this little room talking about these murders as casually as you or I would talk about our daily commute, just completely devoid of human feeling. But he did lead investigators out into the woods, navigating terrain he hadn't seen in 2 decades, to point out exactly where undiscovered bodies were still hidden in the ground.
The final official toll? 49 confirmed murders. And for that, he received 49 consecutive life sentences, an absolute guarantee that he will die in prison.
Now, let's get into Section 4, the 2024 mystery.
This decades-old nightmare was yanked right back into the present day in September 2024. Suddenly, completely out of nowhere, Ridgway was transferred from his maximum security prison in eastern Washington right back to a King County jail in Seattle. It was his first time back in the city in 21 years. And the craziest part? Nobody gave a reason. Not the prison, not the sheriff's office. Victims' families weren't even given a heads up. One mother literally only found out because a journalist called her asking for a comment.
Now, why would they move him? Well, it points back to a terrifying claim he made in 2013. He insisted his real number of victims was actually somewhere between 75 and 80. He's claimed that if they just let him walk the old locations, he could show them where the rest of the remains are. So, the most likely explanation for this sudden 2024 transfer is that he's offered to reveal more undiscovered remains to the authorities.
It just highlights this incredibly complex, somewhat toxic dynamic. On one hand, law enforcement has never fully trusted him, but because of those missing women, they've never been able to stop needing him either. On the other hand, Gary Ridgway knows perfectly well he is the only man with the answers. It's all about control. Even from a jail cell, all these decades later, he is still finding ways to manipulate the system and hold power over these grieving families.
So, I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with one haunting question. When will he give up the rest? Because right now, somewhere out there in the woods, outside Seattle, there are women whose families have been waiting for an answer since the 1980s. And the only person alive who knows where they are is a 75-year-old former truck painter sitting in a jail cell, deciding entirely on his own schedule and in his own time how much truth he feels like handing over today. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this wild, ongoing case. Keep seeking the truth, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
True Files Archive.